What's going on, guys? Welcome back. You know what else is back? The Bad Batch, and with it, the return of good Star Wars storytelling. Season 3 is here, less than a year after Season 2 concluded, and I can't tell you how much of a breath of fresh air this was after the last few pieces of garbage we were subjected to from this franchise, because the show has not skipped a beat, and if Season 3 maintains the same level of quality from the end of Season 2 and the first quarter of this season, we are in for a great conclusion to this story. Right away, something of note is we actually get a recap at the very beginning of Season 3, something that Rebels and even the Bad Batch has strayed away from aside from its very first episode, are the goofy yet charming narrations by Tom Kane, and while we still don't get that here, there's a decent 5 minutes dedicated to catching everyone up on the events of Season 2, which I find interesting because Season 2 didn't include a recap for Season 1, but if anything, I guess it goes to show how intrinsically linked the second and third seasons of this show really are. And right from the beginning of Episode 1, Confined, we are just in the moment. The show perfectly establishes the mood and atmosphere as we watch Omega going through the motions of her new solitary life inside Mount Tantus. Many people, including my dad, have mentioned that this feels kind of reminiscent of Andor and the prison on Narkina 5, but I honestly found this even more harrowing to watch because we're seeing it through the eyes of a literal child. A child who, over the course of the episode, slowly gets everything she has left torn away from her. When Batcher, the creature she's formed a bond with, is scheduled for termination, she lets him go into the wild, something that Dr. Hemlock chastises her for. He even threatens to hurt Crosshair if she continues to rebel against the system. Crosshair being the closest thing she has left to a friend at this point, and right when you think things couldn't get any worse, her little makeshift Bad Batcher doll, which is made out of hay from the feeding pens, gets confiscated. But as we all know, Star Wars is a story about hope, and that still shines through here. At the end of the episode, Emery demonstrates an act of compassion by returning Omega's doll to her, showing us that Omega might actually be getting through to her. Likewise, we see Batcher surviving out in the wild, a huge slap in the face to Hemlock's words earlier in the episode. Despite him claiming that emotion and sentiment have no place inside the walls of Mount Tantus, those might just be Omega's key to survival. Episode 2, Paths Unknown, was another great one in my opinion. I appreciate how they tied it back into the history of the show by reintroducing Roland Durand, the character we first met back in episode 13 of Season 1, with him providing Hunter and Wrecker intel on Hemlock's previous whereabouts, even wishing them well on their quest to rescue Omega, which makes sense considering she was the one who convinced the Pikes to spare his life in the first season. And I like how this episode subtly shows the effect that Tech's loss has had on the remaining members of the Bad Batch, whether it be his goggles sitting in the foreground of a shot focused on Hunter, or the change in the characters' dynamics, with Wrecker now being the one who's more cautious about heading into danger, when in the past he'd have been the one going in guns blazing, while Hunter would be the one protesting against the squad's recklessness. We're also given a solid arc with these young clone cadets coming to trust the Bad Batch and forge their own destiny. We're told that they were left for dead by the rest of the clones who were following orders, presumably under the influence of their inhibitor chips. They even contemplate stealing the Batch's ship and taking the opportunity to escape, but they come back to save them, showing off the trait we've consistently seen in all clones: loyalty. Hunter tells them that they now have a chance to find their own path in the galaxy, reflecting the Bad Batch's own journey of discovering what their purpose is outside of being a soldier. And the third episode, Shadows of Tantus, contains some pretty massive revelations. Mainly that Omega has a high M count, alluding to the possibility that she could be force sensitive, which has been lightly foreshadowed throughout the show, with her showing strange adaptability in high-pressure situations, like when she shot Crosshair's rifle out of his hands in the very first episode, despite having never held a blaster before. There were also the unclear reasons why she was of such extreme value to the Kaminoans. It was originally assumed that, aside from Boba Fett, she was their only source of unaltered Jango Fett DNA, but knowing what we do now, her DNA has undoubtedly been altered from its original host. We also find out that what Dr. Hemlock has been working on is Project Necromancer, which I think we all saw coming. From the middle of Season 2, or hell, even the very end of Season 1, the implication was that this mysterious project had something to do with Palpatine's grand plan to clone himself in The Rise of Skywalker. But if you ask me, this is just an obligatorily shoved-in plot element to give this show some sort of significance in the overarching Star Wars story, because it's kind of insubstantial compared to what I really care about in this show, the character dynamics. And we get plenty of those fun new dynamics between Omega and Crosshair as they work together to escape Mount Tantus, using their skills to make it out and learning from each other along the way. Omega's clearly learned from the rest of the Bad Batch, and still has some things to learn from Crosshair, but he also has a lot to learn from her, especially when it comes to positivity. Initially, I was conflicted on Crosshair acting jokey during their escape because I thought it was inconsistent with his previous characterization, but in retrospect, I realized that he's always had a jokey side when interacting with people he has strong camaraderie with, like the rest of the Bad Batch, or even Commander Cody and Mayday in Season 2. Most of the humor comes from his and Omega's vastly different personalities. At the beginning, he's completely lost hope, telling Omega not to sacrifice anything else for him, and that he belongs in here. But we gradually see her optimism rub off on him to a point where, when she is losing hope and giving up, he's the one to get her back on her feet and motivate her to keep going. Something that does bother me, though, is we never got to see Crosshair's reaction to learning about Tech's death. I had a similar problem with Season 1, or even Season 7 of The Clone Wars, when we never got to see Echo's reaction to learning of Five's death. We just hear him and Rex talking about it like it's old news in Season 1, the implication being that they talked about it off-screen. But Tech quite literally sacrificed himself for Crosshair. Out of everyone, he lobbied the hardest for them to go on the mission to get the intel as to his whereabouts, and gave his life in the hope that they would find him. Learning that information would leave a profound impact on Crosshair, but all we get is this admittedly great exchange between him and Omega.
Did they teach you Plan 72?
Mm-hmm. Tech had me memorize all the plans.
Of course he did.
Moving on to the fourth episode, A Different Approach, this one really serves to develop the relationship between Omega and Crosshair even further. We get more strangely effective comedic beats generated from the stark contrast between their personalities, and they continue to learn from each other, using their different approaches in the heat of the action when needed in order to make it out of the situation successfully. Similar to the Clone Cadets a few episodes back, Crosshair has the option to take the easy way out, by using the credits they've attained through gambling to bribe his way onto a transport ship off-world, leaving Omega behind, just as he had the choice to leave Mayday behind. But just as he did with Mayday, he goes back for Omega, refusing to leave behind the dead weight, his nobility once again shining through. And the ending of the episode was just so heartwarming, seeing Omega reunite with Hunter and Wrecker. I loved Hunter saying, "We never stopped searching," harkening back to his line at the end of Season 2, and what a way for the Kiners to reintroduce Crosshair's theme for the first time this season as he walks off the shuttle and finally comes face to face with his former squad again. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen. Not just killing off Crosshair in another cliche heroic sacrifice that so many other Star Wars redemption stories resort to as a way for the character to make up for their crimes. We're actually going to see Crosshair repent. He has a long road to regaining the trust of his former squad, and it'll inevitably be a difficult one. Before I end things off here, I might as well address the elephant in the room, because in my review of Season 2 last year, I said that I'd be unhappy if the Bad Batch got Omega back in a few episodes, similar to how Din Djarin reunited with Grogu almost immediately after he gave him to Luke Skywalker at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. But I feel there's a clear distinction that needs to be made here. Grogu was brought back purely for the sake of selling more merchandise, rather than serving a relevant story purpose. His return actively undercuts the emotional payoff of Season 2, and really the story of the entire show. But in this case, the show has done an incredibly effective job of communicating the passage of time. Although we only spend 2 full episodes inside Mount Tantus, it feels like an eternity, because we're experiencing the story from the perspective of Omega and Crosshair. Bridging the 1st and 3rd episodes with one focused on Hunter and Wrecker works wonders in reinforcing the tremendous loss the characters have experienced, and how the events of the prior season are weighing on them massively. Even small visual details like the tally marks on the walls of Omega's cell or her hair growing longer, even the additional battle damage on Hunter and Wrecker's armor goes a long way to show the time that has elapsed. And it's not like the threat is gone just because Omega's back with the Batch. Hemlock is still out there with more incentive than ever to get her back. And there are so many lingering questions. What will become of the Bad Batch now? Will they become more actively involved in Rex's clone rebellion? What will happen to Nala Se and the rest of the clones on Tantus? How will the relationship between the Bad Batch and Crosshair develop over the course of the season? These are all questions that I can't wait to see answered. But that's pretty much it for my thoughts on the first quarter of The Bad Batch Season 3. I'll be back in a few weeks to a month to talk about the next chunk of 4 episodes. But as for now, you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on the first 4 episodes of this season? Do you agree with me that this show is maintaining the same level of quality and storytelling as the previous seasons, or do you think it could be better? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.